Hi, welcome to my channel, Math Made Easy with Laurel. I'm Laurel, and in this video we're going to look at set notation and interval notation. When we're describing an interval containing a range of numbers, for example, if we were to take a look at a number line, and I wanted to indicate all of these numbers from and including 2 and on, there's two different ways that I can express that interval of values. One method is called set notation, and I'll talk about that first. Set notation is when you use your greater than, less than, greater than and equal to, less than and equal to, or not equal to notation. So if I wanted to express this, I'm saying that if this was represented values of x, it could be any variable, but we'll just talk about x in this video. If x could be all of these values in this interval right here, basically x can be anything greater than or equal to 2. So we know that x is greater than or equal to 2, but to do it properly, according to convention, we need a little bit more than that. We would say x is an element. That's the symbol for is an element or a member of, so that's a Greek symbol. Real numbers, and this is the symbol for the set of real numbers. And then another math shorthand is this line, which means such that. So it looks a little bit confusing, but all we're saying here is that x is an element of set of real numbers such that x is greater than or equal to 2. When the 2 is included, we use a closed circle. We color it in, so that tells us that 2 is also included in that interval. So this would be how we could write that particular interval of values in this set notation. There's another way that we can express this, and it's called interval notation. And it's similar, but we don't use the greater than or equal than symbols. We use brackets or parentheses instead. So we can start off the same way. We'd say x is an element or a member of the real numbers such that, then we'd say x is an element of, and we would show this interval with brackets and parentheses. So if the point is included in the interval, we use a bracket. And then our start point is 2. And it goes on forever, so it goes on to infinity. And infinity is not a specific point, it goes on and on and on. So we can't put a bracket there to indicate an end point. We would use parentheses. And then we finish off our notation, and that's how we would express it in that interval in set notation or in interval notation. Sometimes people are not very formal in writing their or expressing their intervals in either notation, so you might see people take shortcuts. For example, if they were writing it the interval in set notation, they may just express it as x is greater than or equal to 2. They might not put all the correct formal notation in. Similarly, with interval notation, they might just write it with the brackets and the parentheses. And people understand what they mean, but the formal correct notation is this. Let's take a look at some more examples. So in our second example, we have all values of x. Again, we're going to use x on this number line, less than 3, but it does not include 3. So it would be x is less than 3, but it doesn't include it, so we don't use the equals. And the formal way of writing that in set notation is x is an element of the set of real numbers such that x is less than 3. If we were to write it in interval notation, the way that we would write it is, or the end point is 3, and it does not include the value of 3, so we use parentheses. And the starting point here is negative infinity. So we would say the range of values from negative infinity to 3. We could write it either way if we were doing it informally. If we needed to write it formally, the way that we would write our interval notation is x is an element of the set of real numbers such that x is an element of the set of values from negative infinity to 3, but not including 3. So there's sort of the informal way of writing it, or the formal. And don't get bogged down by all of this, just understand what the mathematical shorthand means. Let's look at this example where we have an interval between two endpoints. So in this case, x is greater than -1, but it can be equal to -1 because there's a closed bracket, but it's less than 4. So one way we could write that is x is greater than or equal to -1, but less than 4. So it's the set of values between those two things. So to write it properly with the formal notation, x is an element of a set of real numbers such that x is greater than or equal to -1, but less than 4. Okay, hopefully you're getting the understanding of the formal notation or more informal way of expressing it. And if we were to write it with interval notation, that's using our brackets and parentheses, we would say it's between -1, but it includes -1, so we use a bracket for our beginning point. Our end point is 4, but because it's not colored in, it means it doesn't include 4. X can be anything up to 4, but does not include 4. So we would put a round bracket. And the more formal way of writing that, x is an element of the set of real numbers such that x is an element of, an element of the range of values from -1, including -1, up to 4, not including 4. Let's look at 2 more examples. Now in our next example, we have 2 intervals indicated. We've got where the blue marker is, we've got values of x that are less than and equal to -1, but we also have a set of values that's greater than 3. So the way that we can express those 2 intervals together is this way. We would say x is an element of the set of real numbers such that, so we'd say our first interval, which is x is less than or equal to -1, so that indicates our very first interval, or the other interval is x is greater than but not equal to, because it's an open circle, 3. So that's how we could express more than one interval. We would use the word or to indicate each separate interval. If we were to do it with interval notation, x is an element of the set of real numbers such that x is a member or an element of the first interval, which we would indicate as negative infinity. Remember, when you're using infinity or negative infinity, it's a round bracket because it's not a specific point. It includes -1, so we use a bracket instead of parentheses. Or x is an element of the second interval would be 3, but it's an open circle, so 3 is not included. And it goes to infinity. Infinity is not a set point, so it's going to be in parentheses as well. And so we've indicated our 2 intervals using interval notation. One last example. You might have a situation like this one, where it's all values on your number line except for one particular value. If I was using set notation to indicate that, I would say x is an element of the set of real numbers such that x does not equal -2, which means it equals all other real numbers on your number line. So it can be anything except -2. If I were to do this with interval notation, I would have to actually do it as 2 separate intervals. So I would say x is an element of a set of real numbers such that x is an element of this interval, which would be from negative infinity to negative 2, and it doesn't include negative 2, so parentheses, or x is an element of the other interval, negative 2, it doesn't include negative 2, to infinity, positive infinity, not a endpoint, so again, parentheses, and that's how we would express it. Those two intervals with interval notation. So I've used x in all of these examples, but if you were doing domain, for example, you would use x if your independent variable was x. If you were indicating your range of a function, you would be using the y values. So the notation would be the same, except that you would say y is an element of the set of real numbers such that, and then define your values of y. So it could be any variable. I just kept it x just to keep it a little simpler in this video, but understand that you could use any variable. Practice these, and hopefully you have a good understanding of how to express an interval using either set notation or interval notation. Okay, take care and see you in the next video.